Technology is now central to our lives, controlling how we work, how we feel, and how we interact with one another. Today, we talk with a true tech pioneer, Fred Voccola, the CEO of Kaseya, a Miami-based company providing cutting-edge IT and cybersecurity to more than 40,000 organizations worldwide. In the Sioux language, Kaseya means protect and defend. But for Fred Voccola, that's not a slogan. It's a mission. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., it's 13th and Park.
We give you information, not a panic attack.
I mean, look what's going on. I mean, my God.
This was it. My kids were gonna die.
That time is gone forever.
This is the biggest story in America.
We weren't prepared for this.
Don't you want to speak truth to power?
Toughest thing I ever had to do.
Fred, great to have you on the show today. It's funny, I'm all dressed up like I'm the businessman and you're the media guy. I like the role reversal already.
Well, Adam, it's great to be here, and thanks for having me. It's I'm in Florida, and I don't have my blazer on or my jacket on, so you can't really tell. But this is the Florida software technology uniform. If you can see under my desk, I have shorts on.
Right. Let's go right at it. There was a piece that just ran on 60 Minutes that should keep everyone awake at night. Had to do with the increasing amount of hacker attacks here in this country. And it used to come from places like China and Russia. Now there's a new word in America, scattered spiders, which is based here and in Canada, and they are hacking away at things that we hold dear. Let me play this clip and get your reaction.
In the past year, hospitals, pharmacies, tech companies, Las Vegas's biggest hotels and casinos have been paralyzed by ransomware attacks.
When we talk about the actors behind some of the more recent ransomware attacks, the name that's generally raised is Scattered Spider. And that's a criminal group that we have a lot of attention on because of the havoc they're wreaking across the United States.
That does keep me awake at night. The idea.
It should. It should.
Now, how concerned are you about this development, we'll say, and what are we effectively doing or trying to do to try to lessen the real assault this has on our security?
We all, as citizens of the world and citizens of this great country, should be very, very concerned. As companies, as industry, as the world has become more digital or has become digital, the phrase that's used a lot is digitally transformed. That means that just about every single type of business relies on data, information, and some form of information technology to drive it. Not just big companies, not just Fortune companies, but even your local dentist. I use this analogy a lot because a lot of people don't think of a dentist office as something that's relying on IT and technology and digital transformation. You can't get an X-ray if the network and the computers are down. If you can't get an X-ray, you can't get a root canal. If you can't get a root canal, the dentist can't do his or her job. The phone systems don't work. Every single aspect of our society is run by digital infrastructure. And that infrastructure is very exposed. And it's not an overly complicated James Bond type of movie, crazy hackers that are with a gun to their head that are banging away at a keyboard and accessing nuclear secrets. It's mostly done through various forms of social engineering, combined with huge amounts of volume to just attack and find one little weakness. And that one little weakness can lead to massive disruption. Our way of life is at risk. Now, there's been one development in the last 8 to 10 years that's really allowed this type of cyber criminal activity to explode. The people who are committing these crimes, they can be paid with anonymous digital currencies that allows them to avoid detection and tracking by law enforcement. I always tell people, who's the most famous criminal of all time in the United States? Al Capone.
Of course, has to be.
Has to be. And Al Capone was a big, tough guy, mafia guy. And it wasn't a big, strong, tough guy who took him down. It was an accountant.
Yeah.
Because they followed the money. A lot of times they'll tell you by following the money is how you can catch a lot of criminal organizations. It's exponentially harder. Don't want to say impossible. It's very difficult when the currency that's used is anonymous. So we've created the perfect storm, for elements like the hacker groups mentioned by 60 Minutes.
I can tell you, Fred, I'm never going to go to the dentist again without feeling all sorts of new trepidation.
Scary enough without.
It's scary enough. But isn't this in some ways kind of, I hate to call it this, a race? It's a race between those who would do ill and people and groups like yours that are trying to stop them and stay one step ahead. And every time they advance, you need to advance, right?
Yeah, it's exactly right. This is such a proliferation. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is the cyber criminals, the cyber gangs, they're very, very smart people. They're not idiots. So they're going to try to go where there's the highest return for the lowest amount of risk. The number one target that we're seeing for these cyber commercial attacks, where the motivation is money and profit,
right?
They're targeting small to mid-sized businesses. A couple of reasons. One, small to mid-sized businesses like your dentist or a 500-person bank instead of Citibank, for example, they're perceived as easier targets, and more often than not, they probably are. Second thing is the damage is less. So we have law enforcement like FBI and Interpol and a bunch of organizations that they have limited resources. They just do. As smart and powerful as the FBI is, there's only so much they can do. So if people are going after $25, $50, $100,000, $200,000 ransoms, that doesn't sound like a lot of money compared to a $25 or a $50 million ransom.
Right.
So that makes it difficult for small to mid-sized businesses to protect themselves. And you're right. That's what we do in companies like us. Is our job, our sole existence on this planet is to make sure that we provide the weapons and the defense systems and the armaments for small to mid-sized businesses to defend the most critical assets and the most critical things they have, and that's their ability to operate through technology.
So part of the 60 Minutes report talked about how allegedly Caesars, which was one of the targets of this massive attack, paid off a $3 million ransom versus others, MGM in this case, refused to pay a $30 million ransom. Well, $3 million, to your point, Fred, to a small business, that's huge. That's like unfathomable to even consider. And that's why I think that's the most vulnerable part of the business world right now to just this, those that don't have the resource to fight back.
All this has happened so fast. If you think about 5, 6, 7 years ago, this wasn't nearly the challenge it is today. And what's happening, it's very similar to what the mafia did in the United States in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, kind of the height of the mafia. I've read that there was a tax on our economy. It was called the mafia tax. And I believe it was upwards of 3 or 4% of all economic activity was taxed indirectly because of the inefficiencies that this criminal element put in.
Yeah.
We're seeing similar things happen now. I mean, the costs to protect the digital availability of businesses, it's real. They got to pay real money for it. And if you're a 19-person architecture firm and all of a sudden someone ransoms all of your plans, your CAD designs, and everything you have, it's tough. And if the ransom's only $50,000, tell that to the person who owns a 19-person architecture firm. You only have to pay $50,000.
Right.
That's catastrophic. That person might only make $150,000 of profit in the whole year. So it's a serious problem. We work really hard to try to prevent this from happening. And there's a lot of things that people can do, proper IT and security posture. You can really have a good defense and a good recovery solution. It's just most people who don't live in IT and security, they don't realize the importance of this and what they need to do to prevent it. And that's the challenge of our time. That'll be the challenge of the next 4 to 5 years.
Let's talk about the tech industry in general. Tech is a variable, even volatile kind of new industry. How do you keep ahead of that curve and keep growing when every day presents a new series of factors and new challenges?
I would argue to say almost every business today is a technology business. If you ask Jamie Dimon, what is JP Morgan Chase? He'd probably say a technology company that happens to deal in financial services. Now, we at Kaseya are very blessed and very lucky. We're serving the market of IT and cybersecurity for small to mid-sized businesses around the world. So our market is growing as small to mid-sized businesses, companies of 5 employees to 500 employees, as they continue along their journey of digitally transforming themselves and being technology-first companies. They realize that as a technology-first company, that technology has to be always available and always secure.
Right.
And to make it always available and always secure requires investment. And those investments are in technology from people like Kaseya. So we're very lucky. If we did Kaseya 15 years earlier, it wouldn't have worked out. And if we did it 15 years later, it probably wouldn't have worked out.
So, Fred, you are coming to us today from Miami. And when we think about big tech, we first think about Silicon Valley. Of course, you came from Silicon Valley, but now you have the Silicon Hills in Texas. You had the 128 corridor outside of Boston. And now you have what I think is being marketed as the new Silicon Valley in Miami.
Silicon Beach is what I've heard it called.
Right? I like Silicon Beach even more. Is this maybe a sign of where the industry is moving, that it's not anymore so geographic centric as it's been in Northern California, that it's now spreading out around the country?
That's a great question. And a lot of people talk about different topics around this. What's driving it? I think there's a couple of factors. Florida as a state and Miami as a city is a desirable place to live. It's very pro-business. Cost of living, while real estate prices have increased in South Florida, compared to a San Francisco or a New York City or a Boston, they're still very, very affordable. The business climate's great. There's no state income tax. There's a lot of a very educated workforce, a lot of reasons that you'll see that trend. But there was a lot to be said for geographic proximity to the quote unquote community, because there wasn't a large community then. If you look at the amount of assets under management of venture capital firms and growth private equity firms that were focused on technology, it was relatively small. So geographic proximity was important, very similar to why financial services was so hubbed in Lower Manhattan for so long. I think that in the last 20 to 25 years, that's changed. It's changed because technology as an industry has enabled every other industry to become dependent on it. So the lines are being blurred between what is a technology company and what is not. I think that there was also an element of business model. So technology companies, the actual revenue models have been changing and evolving very rapidly over the last 20 years. There was an idea or a concept held for a while, myself included, when I lived out in the Valley. You need to be here just because you have to understand how fast it's happening. And there was truth to that. My time in San Francisco in the Bay Area, my cycle of consuming this new ideas and new business models was quick. But what's happened in the last 10 to 15 years is knowledge of the new kind of commercial models has started to expand beyond just the Valley. And I think that technology is what's allowed the thought expansion to cross geographies at a very rapid pace. For us, Miami represents a very business-friendly state with a big urban city that offers the things that's the culture and the arts and the restaurants and the things young people like, the nightclubs and the bars and all the things that young people like to experience. It also takes a very good community culture with a great educational infrastructure. The university systems here in South Florida, Miami are excellent. And for us, it's been great. I think a lot of other people around the country and around the world are starting to realize those things as well. And the last thing is you can get suntan in January. I think people would rather deal with that than deal with shovel and snow.
I was waiting for you to get to the most important ingredient. And by the way, the last 2 minutes, I'm just going to take a clip from and send to the Florida Chamber of Commerce. That was the Chamber of Commerce message. Let's talk about a world that doesn't always move quickly. And it's the world I'm in right now, Washington, D.C. The problem, it always seems, is government moves at a much slower pace than technology. They're not keeping up with all the developments and the innovation and the breakthroughs that are happening in tech all the time.
There's a lot of different opinions about government. Thomas Jefferson has many opinions. He's written about them. I happen to think Thomas Jefferson is one of the smartest, most foresightful human beings that we've ever been blessed to read. And a government that moves slowly isn't necessarily bad. Okay. Because a government that moves slowly or a government that can't always do things isn't always bad, because governments are made up of people. People seek power and consolidation. So any government model you look at, wherever you are on the political spectrum, both sides of the aisle in American politics and all of the ideologies of political structures around the world, always lead to concentrations of power. That's been the human condition for several thousand years. And I think some of our forefathers saw it as a slow government with lots of checks and balances might be better, because it might stop or slow down the inevitable, consolidation of power that every government grabs, regardless of ideology, political party, etc.
Fair enough.
Now, technology changes. The speed of understanding and comprehension of tech can be dangerous. So this is the first time in my life that I've said, wow, this is something that might be dangerous, and it might not be serving, the citizens of our country and the businesses of our country so well. It's a tough problem. Policymakers are policymakers, and pick your poison on the policy. If it's been a debated issue for 40 or 50 or 60 years, it's a lot of time for people to really understand it. And, when you listen to the think tanks in Washington, both sides of the aisle have great arguments on a lot of these, polarizing policies, and they're very well thought out and structured. And technology is the first time some of the issues around it that I've seen, that the knowledge of the people forming the policies is very different because they've never lived it. Think about data privacy.
Right.
Think about the definition of a monopoly. This is a really interesting area of technology. Think about the Clayton Antitrust Act and the purpose of preventing monopolies. It was done to protect the consumer, to protect pricing power and make sure that monopolistic pricing didn't happen. With the railroads and Standard Oil, we've all studied the examples of it. It's the first time where, at least I'm being aware of, the dialogue not necessarily being around protecting the society from monopolistic pricing practices. It's about protecting society from organizations that may become too powerful or too controlling. It's an interesting debate.
But Fred, if we don't aggress quickly in technology, others will. When I talk about others that aren't in the United States, I think about AI. There's a lot of concerns, and legitimately so, about AI, right? But if we don't become a market leader, a global leader in AI, someone else will. That may control a lot of things that would be in our best interest to control moving forward.
It is very interesting what AI is going to allow people to do over the next 5 years. We use it in our business. We use it a ton. It impacts a lot of things we do. We see it all over the place. The potential for it is super cool. A lot of people are worried that AI might be like the Terminator and end society and destroy jobs. But I think AI is going to be one of the most powerful tools that we've ever had to help yield productivity. And yes, we as an American, I think it's in America's best interest to foster an industry, to foster investment, to allow America to be the leader. Because if we're not, it's not the 1950s. If we're not we don't control the global economy anymore. It's going to happen regardless.
Right.
So, I think it's our obligation. Now, what are the policies for that? I'll let the
elected
smart
take
women
care
who
of
get
that.
elected figure that out. But I think your point's a good one, and I would encourage all of the people involved in policy making to get educated quickly on this. Not just the Cliff Notes edition, but to really take the time to become knowledgeable on the topics around technology, AI, and lots of other things.
9/11. So your business at that point was in Lower Manhattan.
Yep.
It was a time none of us will forget. We know where we were, what we were thinking and feeling. You were right in the middle of kind of all of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you lost loved ones, colleagues, and others. But you have an expression you've used before, Fred, real-time adaptation. Like you have to adapt as you're moving forward on anything in business as in life. How did that serve you at that point in time when all the chips were on the table?
It was a scary time. My hometown, Middletown, New Jersey, we lost, I think, more people than any town in the country in 9/11. So it was a tough time. But looking at it purely commercially, not thinking about the personal side of it. We had a small startup company, and we were selling the first APM product, application performance monitoring. Doesn't matter what that is. All the nerds on the call, you might appreciate it. Now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, but we were the first. And we were 30 people strong, 25 people strong, and our offices got knocked out of commission. And it was hard. It was hard because the way that people did commerce changed overnight.
Yeah.
Couldn't travel for a couple of weeks, if not months. No one wanted to travel anyway. I remember, being on airplanes and being the only person on flights, because the way that products were sold back then was you would go and fly to someone and show them your product, and a lot of stuff that had to change. So we had to, in near real time, adjust everything in our business. We had to figure out a different pricing model, a different packaging model, a different selling motion. We had to look at everything, and we did it. When you're forced to do something, the human condition really, really kicks in.
This gets into what you also have talked a lot about, Fred, and it's the words survive and thrive.
Yeah.
Doesn't that apply as well to what you're talking about, not just with 9/11, but with anything in business now?
Yeah, I mean, it's you have to be able to adapt, embrace reality right away. And if the reality is something that you don't want, retire or adapt. We think about COVID. COVID was tough. A lot of industries, a lot of companies. Imagine if you were in the cruise line business during COVID, everything ends. We're here in Miami. Carnival Cruise Lines is headquartered here. One of the most impressive responses to COVID was how Carnival Cruise Lines survived. It's an asset-heavy business. There's massive, massive debt in a business like that, which is fine. That's the way you run an asset business. Now those assets are not producing any revenue because you're not allowed to run. It changes everything. You have to look at it square in the eyes and embrace the reality. We're dealing with it right now. We deal with it all the time at Kaseya. One of the things that we try to do is to not believe our own BS and realize if you're not constantly innovating and changing, you're just waiting and delaying the inevitable. Now, there's been a couple of instances in my career where instead of that happening over 1 to 3 years, happened overnight. 9/11 was one, COVID was another. And the dynamic organizations, the ones that are able to not be married to something that isn't worthy of being married to. They're looking at the reality of the situation on the ground, and they make unemotional decisions to pivot and always take care of what the new market/customer needs. Those are the companies that are resilient and that last for a long time.
I would wish for every business owner in America to hear what you just said, because, everyone faces those moments, right? And you have to have the grit to fight through it because it's not easy at times. I really appreciate you coming on the show today. I learned a lot. I'm not going to be calling my dentist anytime soon. I don't trust him anymore. So, but what you're doing and how you're doing it and how you kind of, in a way, Fred, you're writing a new chapter in the tech industry and in all business when you think about it, as you've not let geography be a limiter, but an expansion of opportunity for so many.
Well, I appreciate you having the time and letting us come out here. And, if you're worried about your dentist, you should have your dentist pick up the phone, call Kaseya. We'll make sure he or she gets taken care of with the best cybersecurity stuff in the world. But thanks again for having us, and really appreciate being here.
It's been our pleasure, Fred. Be well.
Thanks.
Remember to subscribe today and hit the bell so you never miss another episode of the show with that trademark opener from Washington, D.C. It's 13th and Park.